Marcus stands before Victoria's entire board of directors. They know about the CEO and her driver. His career, her reputation, everything they've built hangs in the balance. Victoria's hand reaches for his. The room erupts. This isn't just a scandal. This is war, and they're about to fight it together. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. Marcus Chen had learned 3 important things during his first month as executive driver for Whitmore Industries. 1. His boss, Victoria Whitmore, took her coffee black with 2 sugars at exactly 6:45 every morning. 2. She never made small talk in the car, preferring to work on her tablet or take calls in that crisp, commanding voice that made board members scramble. And 3, despite her Ice Queen reputation and the designer armor she wore like a second skin, she had the saddest eyes he'd ever seen on a successful person. Not that he spent much time thinking about his boss's eyes. He had enough on his plate being a single father to 7-year-old Jasmine, working nights as a rideshare driver to supplement his executive driver salary, and trying to rebuild a life after his ex-wife Keisha had decided motherhood wasn't for her and disappeared to Atlanta with her new boyfriend. The job at Whitmore Industries had been a godsend. Marcus had been driving delivery trucks for a logistics company, coming home with an aching back and barely enough to cover rent on their small 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. When Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor who helped watch Jasmine, had mentioned that her nephew worked in HR at some big tech company and they were looking for an executive driver, Marcus had applied on a whim. He'd never imagined he'd actually get it. The interview process had been rigorous. Background checks, driving tests, reference calls. They'd asked him about his military service, his years driving everything from supply trucks in Afghanistan to 18-wheelers across the Midwest. They'd asked about his record, spotless except for 1 speeding ticket when he'd been rushing Jasmine to the emergency room for a broken arm. They'd asked if he could maintain discretion, if he understood the demands of executive-level service, if he was comfortable with irregular hours. Marcus had answered honestly. He needed the job. He had a daughter to support. He would work as hard as necessary to keep it. When they'd offered him the position as personal driver to the CEO herself, Marcus had almost turned it down. The pressure seemed too intense, the stakes too high. But the salary they quoted was more than double what he was making, with benefits that included health insurance comprehensive enough to cover Jasmine's asthma medication without the monthly panic about copays. He'd accepted. That first morning when Victoria Whitmore had slid into the back seat of the company sedan, Marcus had understood immediately why people called her the Ice Queen. She was beautiful, devastatingly so, but in a way that felt untouchable. Like a marble statue in a museum, something to admire from a distance, but never presume to approach. Pale skin that looked like it rarely saw sunlight, blonde hair pulled back so severely it must have given her headaches, and eyes the color of a winter sky, cold and clear and giving nothing away. She'd given him a list of her regular destinations, explained her preferences for route selection and temperature settings, and then buried herself in her tablet, without another word. Over the following weeks, Marcus learned her patterns. She worked constantly, even in the car. Her phone rang at all hours with calls from London, Tokyo, Singapore. She spoke multiple languages fluently, switching between English, Mandarin, and what sounded like German depending on who was calling. She never ate breakfast, surviving on black coffee until a working lunch that she usually took at her desk. She stayed at the office until 8 or 9 most nights, then came home to her penthouse where Marcus assumed she worked some more. He learned other things too. Small observations that probably made him a creep for noticing. The way she rubbed her left temple when she had a headache. The barely audible sigh she'd let out after particularly difficult calls. The fact that she was always perfectly composed except for one tell. When she was truly stressed, she'd twist the simple platinum band she wore on her right ring finger, spinning it around and around. Marcus never asked about the ring. It wasn't his place. He was the driver, invisible and professional, part of the machinery that kept her life running smoothly. But he wondered, was it an inheritance? A promise to herself? A reminder of something or someone? 3 months into the job, Marcus felt like he understood the rhythms of Victoria Whitmore's life, even if he didn't understand the woman herself. He knew which routes she preferred in morning traffic, knew to have the partition down when she wanted to discuss schedule changes, knew to keep it up when she was on calls. He knew she tipped generously at the coffee shop, but never made eye contact with the baristas. He knew she could devastate someone with a single cool glance, but had never raised her voice, not once. What Marcus didn't know was what Victoria Whitmore did for fun, if she had friends, if she ever laughed, if there was anyone in the world who got to see beneath the perfect professional exterior. Until the night his phone rang at 11:30. Victoria Whitmore existed in a different universe, one of penthouse apartments, charity galas, and business deals worth more than Marcus would earn in 10 lifetimes. She was beautiful in that untouchable way of women who could afford personal trainers, dermatologists, and stylists. Marcus kept his thoughts professional and his eyes on the road. He needed this job. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when traffic was light and Victoria was absorbed in her work, Marcus would catch himself watching her in the rearview mirror. The way sunlight would catch the gold in her hair, the small furrow that appeared between her eyebrows when she was concentrating. The rare moments when she'd gaze out the window and her expression would soften into something that looked almost wistful. He never let himself think about it too much. She was his boss. She signed his paychecks. She existed in a stratosphere so far above his that they might as well be different species. More importantly, Marcus had learned his lesson about women who seemed perfect on the surface. Keisha had been beautiful, charming, everything he thought he wanted. Until the reality of marriage and parenthood had stripped away the performance and revealed someone who'd never wanted any of it. Someone who could walk away from her own daughter without looking back. No, Marcus kept his distance, maintained his professionalism, and devoted his emotional energy to the one person who truly mattered, Jasmine. So when his phone rang at 11:30 on a Friday night, Marcus was already in bed, having just finished reading Jasmine her bedtime story for the 3rd time because she kept asking questions about why the princess couldn't save herself. He saw Victoria Whitmore's name on the caller ID and felt his stomach drop. This was not part of his job description. His contract specified work hours from 6:30 a.m. to 8 p.m., with occasional evening events scheduled in advance. A call at this hour meant emergency, crisis. Something wrong? Marcus? Her voice was different than he'd ever heard it. Softer, slightly slurred, vulnerable. It sent a shiver down his spine that he immediately suppressed. "I need you to come get me." He was already sitting up, reaching for the jeans he'd draped over the chair. "Are you okay? Where are you?" She gave him an address in the financial district, some upscale bar where the cocktails probably cost $50 and came with pretentious garnishes. "I'm fine," she said, but she didn't sound fine. She sounded tired and sad and maybe a little drunk. "I just need a ride home." Marcus checked on Jasmine, still sleeping peacefully with her stuffed rabbit clutched under one arm, her breath whistling slightly from the asthma that had mostly improved but still flared up when she got colds. He called Mrs. Patterson, his neighbor, who'd been his emergency backup since Keisha left. The elderly woman had been watching Jasmine since she was a toddler, and Marcus trusted her completely. "Emergency work call," he explained quietly, outside Mrs. Patterson's door. "She's asleep. I should be back in an hour." Mrs. Patterson waved him off. "Go, go. That sweet baby will be fine. You take care of your boss." 20 minutes later, Marcus pulled up outside a place called the Sterling Room. The facade was all glass and steel and subtle lighting, the kind of establishment that didn't need a sign, because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. The valet gave his modest sedan a dismissive look, one of those quick up-and-down assessments that placed Marcus exactly where society thought he belonged. Below. Marcus ignored it. He'd dealt with worse than snobbery. He'd dealt with enemy fire in Kandahar, with his wife packing her bags while their daughter cried, with eviction notices and empty bank accounts. A valet's judgment meant nothing. He found Victoria at the bar, still perfectly postured on her stool despite the empty wine glasses lined up in front of her like soldiers. She wore a black dress that was more sophisticated than the clubwear he'd seen on other patrons, the kind of elegant simplicity that cost a fortune. The dress had a high neck but left her arms bare, and Marcus found himself noticing the delicate line of her collarbone, the way her skin seemed to glow in the bar's low lighting. Her hair had come partially loose from its usual severe style, softening her features. A few blonde strands had escaped to curl against her neck, and Marcus had the strangest urge to tuck them back. She looked younger, more human, and completely out of place among the loud laughter and aggressive networking happening around her. "Victoria," he said quietly, touching her elbow. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, her skin warm and soft beneath his fingers. "Ready to go home?" She turned those sad blue eyes on him, and for the first time since he'd started working for her 3 months ago, she really looked at him. Not through him, not past him, but at him, like he was a person instead of a function. The intensity of her gaze made Marcus's breath catch. "Marcus," she said, his name sounding different in her mouth than it did when she gave him morning instructions. More intimate somehow. Warmer. "You came." "I said I would." Her laugh was bitter. "Most people don't do what they say." The comment hung between them, weighted with meaning Marcus didn't fully understand. She stood, swayed slightly, and Marcus steadied her with a hand at her waist. He could feel the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her dress, could smell her perfume up close for the first time, something subtle and expensive that made him think of night-blooming flowers. He firmly pushed that observation into the category of things he was not going to think about. "Your tab's settled, miss," the bartender said, his tone respectful in a way that suggested Victoria was a regular here, or at least that her credit card commanded respect. Victoria nodded regally every inch the CEO, even while clearly tipsy, and let Marcus guide her toward the exit. In the car, Marcus adjusted the heat because the November night was cold and Victoria's dress left her arms bare. He handed her a bottle of water from the console. "Drink this. You'll thank me tomorrow." She accepted the water with a small smile. "Always prepared. It's your job to anticipate my needs. That's what makes you good at it." "Is that what I'm good at?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. "Anticipating needs?" Victoria took a long drink of water, studying him in the rearview mirror. "Among other things, you're punctual, discreet. You don't make small talk when I'm working. You always know which route I'll prefer. You remembered after one mention that I'm allergic to lilies when the board sent flowers last month." Marcus felt oddly pleased that she'd noticed these details. "That I'm observant," he said. "Part of the job." The ride back to her penthouse started in silence. Victoria leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, but found himself hyper-aware of her presence in the back seat. He could hear the soft sound of her breathing, could sense when she shifted position. Then, unexpectedly, she started talking. "Do you know what today is, Marcus?" "Friday, ma'am. My wedding anniversary. Or it would have been if I'd actually gotten married, instead of catching my fiancé in bed with my maid of honor the morning of the wedding. That was 5 years ago today." Marcus felt the words hit him like a punch. He'd heard office gossip about the Ice Queen, about how she'd built Whitmore Industries from her father's failing tech company into a powerhouse, about how she worked 18-hour days and never dated anyone. He hadn't known about the almost wedding, hadn't known there was a specific trauma that had frozen her into the controlled, remote person she showed the world. "I'm sorry," he offered, "because what else could you say?" The words felt inadequate, but he meant them. Sorry that she'd been betrayed. Sorry that she was spending her fake anniversary alone at a bar. Sorry that someone had hurt her badly enough to make her build those walls. She made that bitter sound again. "Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't change the fact that I haven't trusted anyone since. Haven't let anyone close. Haven't had intimacy in 5 years because I can't stand the vulnerability of it, the giving someone else that much power to hurt you." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This was definitely not a conversation he should be having with his boss. The alcohol had clearly loosened her carefully maintained control, and he was hearing things she'd never say sober, things he had no business knowing. But something in her voice, that raw honesty that only comes with wine and heartbreak, made him respond. "Vulnerability isn't weakness," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. Letting someone in, even when you're scared they'll hurt you. That's courage." Victoria turned to look at him. Really look at him. Her reflection in the rearview mirror was serious, searching. "Is that what you tell yourself, Marcus? Single dad, working 2 jobs, trying to prove you're enough for your daughter, even though her mother decided you weren't?" He felt the words like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Because Victoria Whitmore, who he'd thought barely noticed him, had been paying attention, had seen beyond the professional facade to the man underneath, had understood exactly what drove him, what scared him, what he was fighting against every single day. "Yeah," he said after a moment, his voice rougher than he intended. "That's exactly what I tell myself. When I'm lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering if I'm messing up Jasmine, if I'm working too much or not enough, if she'll grow up and resent me for not being able to give her the life her friends have. I tell myself that showing up every day, being present even when I'm exhausted, loving her even when I'm terrified I'm doing it wrong, that's brave. That's enough, even when it doesn't feel like it." They drove in silence for several blocks. Marcus navigated the late-night traffic on autopilot, his mind spinning from the unexpected intimacy of the conversation. When they reached her building, Marcus helped her into the elevator, his hand at her elbow, carefully not touching more than necessary. But he was intensely aware of every point of contact, of the way she leaned into him slightly, trusting him to keep her steady. The elevator ride felt endless, the quiet between them charged with something Marcus couldn't name. The penthouse was exactly what he'd expected, all modern furniture and expensive art, spotlessly clean and utterly impersonal. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering city. The furniture was sleek and uncomfortable-looking, probably designed by some famous architect. Everything was in shades of gray and white and chrome, beautiful and cold as a photograph in a magazine. It looked like a hotel, not a home. There were no photographs, no books left open on tables, no clutter of daily living. Just perfect, soulless, expensive emptiness. Victoria kicked off her heels the moment they were inside, making her several inches shorter and somehow more approachable. Marcus had always seen her in those sky-high stilettos that added intimidating height to her already tall frame. Without them, she looked smaller, more vulnerable, more real. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, pressing one palm against the glass like she was trying to connect with something on the other side. Marcus stood by the door, uncertain whether he should leave or make sure she was actually okay. The responsible thing would be to say goodnight and go. But something kept him there, rooted to the spot. "You must think I'm pathetic," she said without turning around. Rich woman drinking alone on her fake anniversary, calling her driver in the middle of the night. "I think you're human," Marcus replied. "I think pain doesn't care about your bank account." She laughed, and this time it wasn't bitter. It was surprised, almost genuine. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months." She turned to face him, leaning back against the window. Everyone else just tells me what they think I want to hear, because they want something from you. And you don't? I already have a job, Marcus said. I just want to make sure you're okay before I leave. Victoria studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt exposed under that analytical gaze. She was looking at him the way she probably looked at business proposals, assessing value and risk and potential return. He was suddenly aware of how he must look to her. 6'2" of lean muscle in his driver's uniform, dark skin, close-cropped hair, the kind of conventionally handsome that he'd never thought much about because he'd been too busy surviving to worry about his looks. But the way Victoria was looking at him now made him feel seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and electric. "Do you want to know what I really want, Marcus?" He shouldn't ask. He should say goodnight and leave and maintain every professional boundary that existed between them. But those sad eyes held something else now, something hungry and desperate and human, and he found himself saying, "What do you want?" She moved closer to him, her bare feet silent on the expensive hardwood. Each step deliberate, purposeful. "I want to feel something. Anything. I want to stop being so controlled all the time. I want to make a mistake, a real messy human mistake, instead of always making the right decision." Marcus's pulse was hammering now, his body responding to her proximity, even as his brain was screaming warnings about every terrible way this could end. "Victoria, you've been drinking. You should get some sleep. We can talk about this when you're sober." "That's what the responsible person would say," she murmured, stopping just inches from him. "That's what everyone would expect you to say." "But I don't want responsible right now, Marcus. I don't want appropriate." She reached up and touched his chest, her pale hand stark against his dark uniform. The contact sent electricity through him. "I want you to look at me like I'm not your boss, like I'm just a woman you might actually want." And God help him, he did want her. Had wanted her since the first time she'd slid into his car and he'd caught her scent, something expensive and subtle that had haunted him for weeks. Had wanted her every time she absently bit her lower lip while reading emails, every time her knee had accidentally brushed his arm when she leaned forward to give him an address, every time her voice had softened by a single degree when she thanked him at the end of a long day. But wanting and acting on it were two different things. "This is a bad idea," he said, even as he didn't move away from her touch. "Probably," she agreed. Her hand was still on his chest, and he could feel the heat of it through his shirt. "But I'm so tired of good ideas. I'm so tired of being strong and controlled and perfect. I just want to feel desired for one night. I want someone to look at me and see a woman, not a CEO or a business asset or a disappointment." "You could never be a disappointment," Marcus said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "Victoria, you're brilliant and beautiful and so strong it's intimidating. Any man would want you. Then prove it." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper, and Marcus felt it in his bones. "Stop being my employee for one night. Stop being careful and respectful and appropriate." She stepped even closer, close enough that he could feel the heat of her body, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker blue in her eyes, close enough that one small movement would bring them together. "Strip for me, Marcus. Show me you see me as a woman, not just your boss." The words hung between them, shocking and raw, and absolutely not something she would say if she were sober. Every bit of his common sense was screaming at him to leave, to call her a cab, to protect both of them from a decision made in grief and alcohol and loneliness. But Marcus had been alone for a long time, too. Had spent 2 years being both mother and father to Jasmine, being strong and responsible, and never letting himself want anything just for him. Had spent months driving this woman around, watching her, wanting her, telling himself she was completely off limits. And now she was looking at him like he was water in a desert, like he was the answer to a question she'd been too afraid to ask. He reached up slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was softer than he'd imagined, and she leaned into his touch with a small sound that went straight through him. "If we do this," he said quietly, his voice low and serious, "we do it right. You're not just scratching an itch or making yourself feel something. You don't get to pretend this didn't happen tomorrow and go back to being my Ice Queen boss. If I stay, we're equals tonight. Just Marcus and Victoria. 2 people. Can you do that?" She searched his eyes, and he saw the moment she made the decision, saw the careful control she always maintained crack just enough to let something real through. "Yes," she whispered, "just 2 people." Marcus lowered his mouth to hers, and the moment their lips touched, something inside him ignited. She tasted like wine and regret and possibility, and she kissed him back with a desperate hunger that told him this wasn't just about physical need. This was about being seen, being wanted, being chosen. He broke the kiss and stepped back, his breathing already uneven. Victoria's lips were parted, her eyes dark with desire, and Marcus had never wanted anything more than he wanted to give her what she'd asked for. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuttoned his uniform shirt, watching her watch him. Her gaze tracked the movement of his hands with an intensity that made his skin heat. Each button revealed more, and he could see her breathing quicken, could see the way her hands clenched at her sides like she was restraining herself from reaching for him. He shrugged out of the shirt, revealing the undershirt beneath. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, and Marcus heard her sharp intake of breath. He pulled the undershirt over his head in one smooth motion, and the sound she made was almost a whimper. Marcus worked out because it helped him process stress, because it gave him 30 minutes a day that was just for him, because staying strong meant he could always carry Jasmine when she was tired. He'd never thought much about his body as something to display, something to be desired. But the way Victoria was looking at him now, her eyes tracing the definition of his chest and arms and the flat plane of his stomach, made him feel powerful in a way that had nothing to do with muscle. "You're beautiful," she breathed, and the wonder in her voice was almost his undoing. "Your turn," he said, his voice rough with want. But Victoria shook her head slightly. "Not yet. I want to look at you first. I want to remember this." She moved closer, and then her hands were on him, tentative at first, then bolder. Her fingers traced the lines of his body with a reverence that made his breath catch. She touched him like he was something precious, something worth savoring. When she pressed her lips to his chest, right over his heart, Marcus groaned and pulled her fully against him. The contrast of her clothed body against his bare skin was maddening. The dress she wore was a barrier he suddenly needed gone. He found the zipper at her back, lowered it slowly, his knuckles grazing her spine and making her shiver. The dress pooled at her feet, and Marcus stepped back to look at her. Victoria stood before him in black lace, her pale skin luminous in the city light filtering through the windows. She was curves and softness where he was angles and muscle, and the contrast was breathtaking. His turn to say it. "You're beautiful?" Her smile was shy, vulnerable, nothing like the confident CEO he drove every day. "No one's seen me like this in 5 years. Then they're all fools." He closed the distance between them again, kissing her with all the want he'd been holding back for months. Her hands were in his hair, on his shoulders, sliding down his back, and everywhere she touched felt like fire. Marcus lifted her, and her legs wrapped around his waist instinctively, trusting him to hold her. He carried her through the penthouse, navigating by instinct, and the directions she breathed against his neck. The bedroom was as impersonal as the rest of the apartment, but Marcus didn't care about the expensive linens or the designer furniture. All he cared about was the woman in his arms, finally letting herself be vulnerable, finally letting herself want. They fell onto the bed together, and Marcus took his time, learning her body. He kissed the hollow of her throat, the curve of her shoulder, the sensitive spot just below her ear that made her gasp. He mapped her body like territory he wanted to memorize, paying attention to every sound she made, every place that made her arch into his touch. Victoria was equally exploratory, her hands learning the landscape of his body, finding scars and asking wordless questions with her fingertips. Marcus felt exposed in a way he hadn't in years, seen and known and desired for exactly who he was. When they finally came together, it was with a desperate need that transcended every difference between them. Class, race, economics, power, all of it fell away until there were just two people finding shelter in each other. Marcus moved above her, watching her face, seeing the walls come down completely as pleasure built between them. She was beautiful like this, uninhibited and real and his, at least for tonight. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing hard, neither quite willing to let go and face what they'd just done. Marcus's mind was already racing ahead to consequences and complications, but Victoria's head was on his chest, her hand resting over his heart, and for this moment he let himself just be present. "That was not a mistake," she said quietly, as if she could hear his thoughts. "I don't regret it." "Neither do I," Marcus admitted. "But we both know this changes everything." Victoria lifted her head to look at him, and in her eyes he saw the same mixture of fear and hope he felt. Maybe everything needed to change. They fell asleep like that, two people from different worlds who'd collided in the most unexpected way, with no idea how they were going to navigate the morning light, but willing to try. The first test came Monday morning when Marcus pulled up to Victoria's building at the usual time. He'd spent Sunday with Jasmine, pushing her on the swings at the park, while his mind replayed every moment of Friday night, trying to figure out how he was supposed to act when he picked up the woman he'd slept with, who also happened to sign his paychecks. Victoria emerged from the building in her usual armor, charcoal suit perfectly tailored, hair in its severe chignon, heels clicking against the sidewalk with purpose. But when she slid into the back seat and their eyes met in the rearview mirror, something passed between them that made Marcus's breath catch. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, and there was a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before Friday night. "Good morning, Victoria." He pulled into traffic, hyper-aware of her presence behind him in a way he hadn't been just days ago. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, full of unspoken words and shared memory. 3 blocks from Whitmore Industries, Victoria's phone rang. She answered in her CEO voice, crisp and authoritative, discussing quarterly projections and board meetings. Marcus listened to her command, a room full of executives without being in the same building as them, and felt a surge of admiration mixed with something more complicated. This was the woman who'd whispered his name in the darkness, who'd been soft and vulnerable in his arms. How did you reconcile those two versions of the same person? When she finished the call, Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, we need to establish some ground rules." His hands tightened on the wheel. "Okay. During work hours, I'm still your boss. You're still my employee. We maintain complete professionalism. No one can know about us until we figure out what this is and how to handle it properly." "Agreed. But after hours, when it's just us, no more boss and employee. Just Marcus and Victoria." "Deal." She paused. "Also, I'd like you to come to dinner at my place tonight. I'll cook." "You cook?" The surprise in his voice made her laugh, a real one. "I have many hidden talents, Mr. Chen. 7 o'clock? I'll need to arrange childcare for Jasmine." "Bring her," Victoria said, and Marcus's head snapped around to look at her before he remembered he was driving and jerked his attention back to the road. "Bring her?" Victoria's voice was softer now. "Marcus, if we're going to try this, I need to know all of you. That includes the most important person in your life. I can't ask you to keep those parts separate." The ball of tension Marcus had been carrying since Friday night loosened slightly. He hadn't realized how much he'd been dreading having to choose between his daughter and this impossible, improbable thing with Victoria. "Okay," he said. 7 o'clock, both of us. That evening, Marcus stood outside Victoria's building with Jasmine's small hand in his, both of them dressed in their Sunday best because Jasmine had insisted. She wore her favorite purple dress with the sparkles, and Marcus had spent 10 minutes helping her get her hair into the ponytail she'd demanded. "Daddy, is Miss Victoria your girlfriend?" Jasmine asked as they rode the elevator up. Marcus had been dreading this question. "She's someone very important to me," he said carefully. "Someone I'd like you to meet properly." "Is she nice?" "She can be tough sometimes, but yes, I think she's very nice." "Will she like me?" Jasmine's voice had gone small, and Marcus knelt down to her level. "Baby girl, anyone who doesn't like you is crazy. You're smart and funny and the best daughter in the whole world. Miss Victoria is going to love you. But remember your manners, okay?" Victoria answered the door in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down around her shoulders, and Marcus almost didn't recognize her. She looked younger, softer, more approachable. Her eyes went to Jasmine, and something in her expression shifted. "You must be Jasmine," she said, crouching down to the little girl's level. "Your dad has told me so many wonderful things about you. I like your dress. It's very sparkly." "Thank you," Jasmine said, suddenly shy. "Daddy helped me with my hair. He's not very good at it, but he tries really hard." Victoria's smile was genuine. "I think he did a great job. Would you like to come in? I made spaghetti and meatballs. That's my favorite." Jasmine's shyness evaporated. "Do you have garlic bread?" "I always have garlic bread," Victoria said seriously. "It's the most important part." As they ate dinner around Victoria's gleaming dining table, Marcus watched his two worlds collide with a sense of surreal wonder. Victoria asked Jasmine about school, about her favorite subjects, about her friends. She listened with genuine interest as Jasmine explained her current obsession with butterflies and how she was going to be a scientist when she grew up so she could study them. After dinner, Victoria brought out a board game, something complicated involving butterflies and flowers that she'd apparently bought that afternoon. She and Jasmine played while Marcus cleaned up the kitchen, and he kept glancing over to see them bent over the game board, Victoria patiently explaining rules while Jasmine peppered her with questions. At 8:30, Jasmine was yawning despite her protests that she wasn't tired. Victoria produced a spare bedroom that she'd somehow transformed into a child-friendly space in a matter of hours, complete with books and stuffed animals. "I keep it for my sister's kids when they visit," she explained, but Marcus suspected she'd done some shopping specifically for tonight. After Jasmine was tucked in and drifting off to sleep, Marcus and Victoria finally had a moment alone. They stood on her balcony, the city spread out below them, not quite touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. "She's amazing," Victoria said softly. "You've done an incredible job with her. I'm just trying not to screw it up too badly." "You're not screwing anything up. She's confident, curious, kind. That doesn't happen by accident." Victoria turned to look at him. "I was terrified of tonight, you know. Terrified I'd say the wrong thing, or that she'd hate me, or that you'd realize how completely out of my depth I am with children. But you were perfect with her. Natural." Victoria laughed, but it was self-deprecating. "I was faking it. Every second I was thinking, what would a normal person do? What would someone who's good with kids say?" "Marcus, I don't know anything about being around children. I've built companies and negotiated billion-dollar deals, but 7-year-olds terrify me. You could have fooled me, and you definitely fooled Jasmine. She liked you, I could tell." "I liked her too," Victoria said, and there was wonder in her voice. "I really, really liked her." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Victoria asked the question Marcus had been waiting for. Tell me about Jasmine's mother. Marcus took a deep breath. Keisha and I met in college, got married too young, had Jasmine maybe before we were ready. Keisha struggled with postpartum depression, but she wouldn't get help. Said asking for help was weakness. By the time Jasmine was 5, Keisha had checked out emotionally. Then one day, I came home and found a note. She'd left with some guy she'd been seeing, moved to Atlanta, said she wasn't cut out for motherhood, that she needed to find herself. He could hear the bitterness creeping into his voice and tried to push it down. She sends a card on Jasmine's birthday and Christmas. That's it. No calls, no visits. Jasmine asks about her sometimes, and I don't know what to say that won't hurt her more. I'm sorry, Victoria said quietly. That must be so hard. The hard part is watching Jasmine try to understand why her mother doesn't want her. The hard part is knowing that no matter how much I love her, no matter what I do, there's always going to be that wound. Marcus turned to Victoria. So that's my baggage. Single dad, trust issues with women who might leave, and a daughter who needs stability more than anything. Still want to figure this out? Victoria reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. I told you about my fiancé, about catching him with my maid of honor. What I didn't tell you is that they're married now. Have a baby. They send me Christmas cards with photos of their perfect family, and every year I wonder what was so wrong with me that he couldn't wait until after the wedding to betray me. She squeezed his hand. So yes, I have baggage too. Trust issues, commitment fears, and absolutely no idea how to be in a healthy relationship because I've spent 5 years hiding behind my work. But I'm still here, Marcus. I still want to try. They kissed then, slow and deep, and Marcus felt something settle in his chest, something that felt like hope. The next few weeks were a study in compartmentalization. During work hours, Marcus and Victoria maintained perfect professionalism. He drove, she worked. They barely spoke except for destination changes and polite pleasantries. But after hours, they built something new. Victoria came to Marcus's modest apartment and helped Jasmine with homework. Marcus showed Victoria how to braid hair, both of them laughing as Jasmine patiently coached them through it. They had dinner together 3 or 4 nights a week, switching between Victoria's penthouse and Marcus's apartment, learning to navigate their different worlds. Victoria met Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's neighbor and unofficial backup grandmother to Jasmine, and won her over by asking for her cookie recipe and actually meaning it. Marcus met Victoria's assistant Claire, a sharp-eyed woman who figured out something was happening within 5 minutes of seeing them together and promised to keep it quiet. They were careful. No touching at work, no personal conversations where anyone could overhear, no lingering looks in the rearview mirror. But Marcus could feel the connection between them growing stronger, roots digging deeper, despite all the reasons this shouldn't work. The first real complication came 6 weeks in. Marcus was picking Victoria up from a business dinner at some exclusive restaurant. He waited outside, scrolling through his phone, when he heard voices approaching. Victoria's laugh, practiced and professional, and a man's voice he didn't recognize. "I've always admired your focus, Victoria," the man was saying. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation over drinks? I appreciate the offer, Richard, but I have an early morning tomorrow." Victoria's tone was polite, but dismissive. "Come on, Victoria, you can't work all the time. When was the last time you let yourself have some fun?" "I have fun," she replied coolly. "Just not with married men who think their wedding rings are invisible in dim lighting." The man sputtered something, but Victoria had already spotted Marcus's car and was walking toward it, her stride confident and final. She slid into the back seat, and Marcus caught the flash of anger in her eyes before she schooled her expression. "Rough night?" he asked as he pulled into traffic. "Richard Thornton thinks every woman is available to him if he just asks persistently enough." Victoria's voice was tight. He spent 2 hours talking about himself, interrupted me 6 times during my presentation, and then had the nerve to proposition me in front of the restaurant. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Want me to go back and have a word with him? Victoria's laugh was surprised and genuine. My driver threatening a potential business partner? That would certainly make the gossip columns. Besides, I handled it. You always handle it, Marcus observed. Every inappropriate comment, every dismissive remark, every time someone underestimates you. You handle it all with perfect professionalism. Don't you ever just want to tell them all to go to hell? Every single day, Victoria admitted. But that's not how women in my position survive. We smile, we deflect, we outwork everyone until they can't deny our competence. We certainly don't get emotional or angry because then we're difficult or unstable. Marcus drove in silence for a moment, then made a decision. He pulled over into an empty parking lot, put the car in park, and turned to look at Victoria through the partition. Get out. What? Get out of the back seat and come sit up here with me. Victoria, this is wildly inappropriate during work hours. Work hours ended when you left that restaurant. Right now, I'm not your driver. I'm Marcus and you're Victoria, and I need to see your face when I tell you that you're allowed to be angry. The partition between them suddenly felt like a metaphor for all the walls they were trying to navigate. After a moment, Victoria opened her door, got out, and slid into the front passenger seat. It was the first time she'd sat there, and the sudden proximity felt both intimate and slightly dangerous. Tell me I'm allowed to be angry? She repeated, her voice challenging. You spend every day being strong and controlled and perfect, Marcus said. You handle Richard Thornton's and board meetings and business deals without ever showing weakness. But Victoria, you're allowed to be tired of it. You're allowed to be furious that men like Richard think they can proposition you after you've just schooled them in business. You're allowed to want something different. Victoria stared at him, and he watched the careful control she always maintained begin to crack. I am tired, she whispered. I'm so tired of being strong all the time. I'm tired of proving myself in every meeting, of managing everyone's expectations, of never letting anyone see that sometimes I just want to scream at the unfairness of it all. Then scream, Marcus said. Right here, right now. No one's watching, no one's judging. Just let it out. I can't, she said, but her voice was breaking. I can't just stop being the CEO, stop being in control. If I start, I don't know if I'll be able to stop. Marcus reached over and took her hand. I've got you. I promise. I've got you. And that's when Victoria Whitmore, CEO of a billion-dollar company, terror of boardrooms, ice queen of the business world, completely fell apart. She cried like Marcus had never seen anyone cry, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the fiancé who'd betrayed her, for the 5 years she'd spent building walls, for every time someone had underestimated her, for the loneliness of always being strong. Marcus pulled her into his arms, held her while she soaked his shirt with tears, murmured comfort against her hair, and let her break in the safety he could provide. When the storm finally passed, Victoria pulled back, her makeup ruined, her eyes red, looking more real than Marcus had ever seen her. I'm sorry, she started, but he cut her off. Don't apologize for being human. Don't apologize for trusting me enough to fall apart. Victoria, you're not weak for having feelings. You're strong for finally letting yourself feel them. She kissed him then, desperate and grateful, and Marcus kissed her back with all the reassurance he could offer. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria laughed shakily. I must look terrible. You look beautiful, Marcus said, and meant it. You always look beautiful, but right now you look real. And I'll take real over perfect any day. They sat in that parking lot for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Victoria told him about the pressure of living up to her father's legacy, about the board members who constantly questioned her decisions, about the loneliness of success. Marcus told her about the fear of not being enough for Jasmine, about working himself to exhaustion trying to be both parents, about the guilt of wanting something for himself when his daughter needed so much. By the time Marcus drove them to Victoria's building, something between them had shifted. They'd moved past the surface, past the physical attraction, and the thrill of forbidden romance. They'd found something deeper, something that felt like partnership. The second complication came from an unexpected direction. Marcus's ex-wife Keisha called out of the blue on a Tuesday evening. He was at Victoria's place, helping Jasmine with a science project while Victoria made dinner, when his phone rang with the number he'd deleted but still recognized. Marcus, Keisha's voice was the same, confident and charming. "How are you? What do you want, Keisha?" He moved into the hallway, not wanting Jasmine to hear this conversation. "I've been thinking about you and Jasmine. I made a mistake leaving. I want to be part of her life again." Marcus felt cold anger wash over him. "You want to be part of her life? After 2 years? After missing her 6th birthday, her 7th birthday, her first day of first grade, her first lost tooth? After sending exactly 4 cards and making 0 phone calls?" "I know I messed up," Keisha said, and she actually sounded contrite. "But I'm in a better place now. I've been in therapy. I'm ready to be the mother Jasmine deserves. 2 years too late." "Marcus, please. She's my daughter too. Don't I deserve a second chance?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to control his temper. "Here's what you deserve, Keisha. You deserve exactly what you gave Jasmine. Nothing. You don't get to waltz back into her life when it's convenient for you. You don't get to break her heart again when being a mother gets hard. You made your choice. Now live with it." He hung up before she could respond, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. When he turned around, Victoria was standing in the hallway, concern written across her face. "I'm fine," he said automatically, then corrected himself. "No, I'm not fine. That was Jasmine's mother. She wants back in." Victoria moved closer, her presence grounding. "What are you going to do?" Marcus ran a hand over his face. "I don't know. Part of me wants to tell her to go to hell and protect Jasmine from more disappointment. But what if she's really changed? What if Jasmine deserves a chance to know her mother? What does your gut tell you? That Keisha will hurt Jasmine again. That she'll show up for a few weeks or months, play at being a mother, and then disappear when it gets too real." Victoria took his hands in hers. "Then trust your gut. You know Keisha better than anyone. You know Jasmine better than anyone. Trust yourself." Marcus pulled her close, breathing in her scent, letting her steady presence calm his racing thoughts. "When did you get so wise?" "I have an excellent advisor," Victoria murmured against his chest. "Brilliant man. Very handsome. Terrible at braiding hair, but improving." Despite everything, Marcus laughed. They stood like that for a long moment before Victoria asked quietly, "Are you going to tell Jasmine about the call?" "Not yet. Maybe not ever. If Keisha's serious about being involved, she needs to prove it first. She needs to show up consistently before I let her anywhere near our daughter." That night, after Jasmine was asleep in Victoria's spare room, Marcus and Victoria talked about family and responsibility and what it meant to protect the people you loved. Victoria told him about her own complicated relationship with her father, a brilliant businessman who'd shown her more affection through stock portfolios than hugs. Marcus told her about his parents, solid working-class folks who'd given him everything. They could and taught him that love meant showing up every single day. "I'm scared," Marcus admitted, as they lay tangled together in Victoria's bed. "I'm scared Keisha will hurt Jasmine again. I'm scared I'm not enough. I'm scared of screwing up this thing between us because I have so much baggage." Victoria propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the darkness. "Marcus Chen, you are enough. You've been enough every single day for 2 years. You're an incredible father, a good man, and you're definitely enough for me. Baggage and all? Especially with the baggage. Besides, we match. Damaged CEO and single dad driver, we're like a romance novel." "Except in romance novels, things work out," Marcus said. "In real life, it's messier." "Then let's be messy together," Victoria replied, and kissed him until he stopped thinking about complications and just felt. The revelation happened on a cold November evening, 3 months after that first night when Victoria had asked him to strip for her. They were at Marcus's apartment, a weekly routine now. Victoria was helping Jasmine with math homework while Marcus cooked dinner. Normal, domestic, almost like a real family. Then Jasmine said something that changed everything. "Miss Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. When are you going to marry my daddy?" Marcus nearly dropped the pan he was holding. Victoria's eyes went wide. She recovered quickly, though, her CEO negotiation skills kicking in. "That's a very big question, Jasmine. Why do you ask?" "Because Emma's mom got married again, and now Emma has a stepdad who comes to her soccer games and helps her with homework. And you do those things for me. Plus, Daddy smiles way more now than he used to. And when you think no one's watching, you hold hands. So I thought maybe you were going to get married." Victoria glanced at Marcus, who had frozen by the stove. They hadn't talked about marriage. They hadn't even officially defined what they were doing. They'd been taking it day by day, navigating work and family and the complicated dance of their different worlds. "Well," Victoria said carefully, "your daddy and I care about each other very much. But marriage is something adults have to think about very carefully." "I know," Jasmine said with 7-year-old wisdom. "But I just want you to know that if you did want to marry him, I think that would be really nice." Then she went back to her math homework like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of their carefully constructed relationship. After dinner, after Jasmine was in bed, Marcus and Victoria sat on his small balcony, the city noises filtering up from below. "So," Victoria said, "marriage?" "Yeah," Marcus replied. "That's not how I pictured that conversation coming up." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "For the record, I haven't thought about marriage in 5 years. After what happened, I swore I'd never put myself in that position again. And now? Now I have a 7-year-old asking me when I'm going to marry her father, and instead of being terrified, I'm thinking about what that would actually look like." Marcus turned to her. "Victoria, we don't have to have this conversation tonight. We can take all the time we need." "I know," she said, "but I want to have it anyway. Marcus, these past 3 months have been the happiest I've been in years, maybe ever. You and Jasmine, you've given me something I didn't know I was missing. A family, a home, a reason to leave the office before midnight." "Same," Marcus admitted. "You've given us stability, security. You've given Jasmine a role model who's brilliant and successful and kind. You've given me a partner. But," Victoria continued, "we need to talk about the practical realities, the optics of the CEO dating her driver, the judgment from your family, my board, society in general, the fact that we come from completely different economic backgrounds." "Marcus, I need to know you're prepared for that." "I don't care what people think," Marcus said firmly. "I care about Jasmine. I care about you. I care about building something real, no matter how messy it looks from the outside." Victoria studied his face in the dim light. "What about Jasmine? This relationship, it affects her too. If things between us don't work out, that's on both of us. She's already attached to you. She loves you. If you leave, it'll hurt her." "Then I won't leave," Victoria said simply. "Marcus, I don't know how to be a mother. I don't know if I'll ever be good enough at the kid stuff. But I do know how to keep my commitments. I do know how to show up every day. And I love that little girl in there. I love you." It was the first time either of them had said it out loud. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning and possibility. "I love you too," Marcus said. "Both of you. We're a package deal." "I know," Victoria replied. "I wouldn't want it any other way." They kissed then, slow and sweet, sealing a promise that neither of them fully understood yet, but both were willing to work toward. The final test came in the form of a board meeting. Victoria had been called to defend some recent decisions, including the creation of a new executive position that some members thought was unnecessary. Marcus didn't know the details, but he knew Victoria had been stressed about it all week. He dropped her off that morning with an encouraging smile and a subtle brush of hands that no one else would notice. Then he waited in the car, scrolling through his phone, trying not to worry. 2 hours later, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Can you come up?" 8th floor conference room. It was unprecedented. He'd never been inside Whitmore Industries beyond the lobby. But something in that message made Marcus lock the car and head inside. The receptionist looked startled when he asked for the 8th floor but called up to confirm. When the elevator doors opened, Victoria's assistant Claire was waiting. "She's asking for you," Claire said quietly, leading him down a hallway. "I don't know what's happening in there, but it's not good." The conference room doors were glass, and through them Marcus could see a dozen people in expensive suits surrounding a long table. Victoria stood at the head, her spine straight, her face composed. But Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, could read the exhaustion in her eyes. Claire knocked and opened the door. "Miss Whitmore, your driver is here." Every eye in the room turned to Marcus. He felt their judgment, their curiosity, their dismissiveness. This was Victoria's world, and he didn't belong in it. But Victoria's face transformed when she saw him. Relief, gratitude, something deeper. "Excuse me for a moment," she said to the room, and walked toward Marcus. They stepped into the hallway, and the moment the door closed behind them, Victoria's perfect composure cracked. "They're questioning every decision I've made this quarter. They're suggesting I'm distracted, that my judgment is compromised. Someone's been digging into my personal life, Marcus. They know about us." Marcus felt cold dread settle in his stomach. This was what they'd both feared. The exposure, the judgment, the professional consequences. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," Victoria said fiercely. "I'm not ashamed of us. I'm not ashamed of loving you, but I need you to understand what staying with me might mean. Media scrutiny, judgment, people questioning your motives, and my judgment. Your life will become public in ways you never wanted." Marcus thought about Jasmine, about the life he'd carefully built for her, thought about the stability he'd worked so hard to provide. Then he thought about Victoria's smile when she helped with homework, about the way Jasmine lit up when she walked in the door, about the partnership they'd built. "Some things are worth fighting for," he said. "So what do you need from me right now?" Victoria took a deep breath. "I need you to go back in there with me and sit down. I need you to show them that I'm not ashamed of my choices, that we're not hiding. Marcus Chen, will you walk back into that conference room with me?" He took her hand, laced their fingers together. "Lead the way." They walked back in together, hand in hand, and Marcus could feel the shock ripple through the room. Victoria moved to the head of the table, and Marcus took a seat against the wall, visible but not intrusive. "Gentlemen, ladies," Victoria said, her voice clear and strong. "Let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, I'm in a relationship with Marcus Chen, who until recently was my driver. Yes, we've taken steps to ensure no conflict of interest. And yes, my personal life is my own business. But since you've decided to make it your business, let me be crystal clear. My personal relationships do not affect my ability to run this company. The numbers speak for themselves. We've had record growth this quarter. Our new initiatives are outperforming projections. Client satisfaction is at an all-time high. So if you have concerns about my professional performance, present them with data. Otherwise, my personal life is not up for board review." The room erupted in arguments and defenses. Marcus watched Victoria navigate it all with skill and grace, shutting down inappropriate questions while addressing legitimate business concerns. She was magnificent, terrifying, in complete control. After an hour, the board finally agreed to table the personal questions and focus on actual business. When the meeting finally ended, Victoria was exhausted but triumphant. She'd held her ground, protected what mattered, and reminded them all why she was the CEO. As they left the building together, no longer hiding, Marcus felt something shift. They weren't sneaking around anymore. They weren't pretending. They were just Marcus and Victoria, facing the world together. That night, Marcus proposed. Not with a ring he couldn't afford, not at a fancy restaurant he'd have to save for months to pay for. He proposed in his small apartment with Jasmine asleep down the hall, with dishes still in the sink, and life happening all around them. "I know we come from different worlds," he said, holding Victoria's hands in his. "I know this won't always be easy. But Victoria, you've become my partner in every way that matters. You've become Jasmine's family. You've made us whole. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you take on a single dad and his opinionated 7-year-old? Will you build this messy, complicated, beautiful life with us?" Victoria was crying, actual tears running down her face, and her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said. "Yes to the mess. Yes to Jasmine. Yes to you. Yes to all of it." They told Jasmine the next morning over breakfast. She screamed with joy, hugged them both so hard Marcus worried about bruises, and immediately started planning the wedding with 7-year-old enthusiasm. And as Marcus watched Victoria patiently explain that, no, they probably couldn't have a butterfly release and a fireworks display and a petting zoo at the wedding, he thought about how far they'd come from that night when a drunk, heartbroken CEO had asked her driver to strip for her. Sometimes the best love stories started with the most unexpected commands. Sometimes vulnerability and desire combined to create something neither person expected, but both desperately needed. Marcus Chen and Victoria Whitmore weren't perfect. Their relationship would face challenges, judgment, and complications they couldn't yet imagine. But they had something more valuable than perfection. They had honesty, partnership, and a willingness to be brave together. 6 months later, they married in a small ceremony with Jasmine as the proudest flower girl in history. Victoria wore a simple white dress, Marcus wore his best suit, and neither of them could stop smiling. As they exchanged vows promising to love each other through all of life's complications, Marcus thought about that parking lot conversation when Victoria had finally let herself fall apart, about learning to be vulnerable together, about building trust one honest moment at a time, the ice queen and the driver, the CEO and the single dad, Victoria and Marcus, two people from different worlds who'd found in each other exactly what they'd been missing: home. And it all started with 2 words that changed everything: strip for me. Sometimes the most unexpected invitations led to the most extraordinary destinations.